Mabuhay at magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. Ako po si Dr. Bong Bonaventura, and for today we are going to talk about a case discussion regarding family life cycle. Let me share my slide. These are the objectives for this lecture. The general instructional objective is to elucidate the concepts of the family life cycle through a discussion of a case. Specific behavioral objectives include to enumerate the different stages of the FLC, to explain the developmental expectations of each stage, and to relate the concepts of FLC to comparable stages in the human life cycle, human lifespan. The case I'm going to share to you is actually a real case, and personal details have been changed to protect the privacy of the individuals concerned. So let's start off with our cast of characters. So Miguel is a 38-year-old male. He's a writer, illustrator for a publishing firm. He was the one who consulted me for a situation that occurred within his family. He's married to Tricia, who's 35 years old, female, a dental technician for a government hospital. They have 3 children. The eldest is Bernie, 13 years old, male, Judith, 9 years old, female, and Sam, 6 years old, male. So the first task is to identify at which developmental stage each individual member is in. So let's look at the family structure again. So as we have mentioned, Miguel is 38 years old. He's a young adult transitioning to middle age. Tricia is 35, also a young adult, but also transitioning in a few years to middle age. So their kids, Bernie, the eldest boy at 13, is an adolescent. Judith, a 9-year-old girl, is school-aged. And the youngest, Sam, who's 6 years old, is in preschool. So look at this diagram and try to determine how many distinct relationships exist in this family. So let's sort of provide a premise as to what a relationship is. So a relationship exists between two people if someone, subjectively speaking, believes one or both are significantly affected by the welfare, attitudes, behavior, and needs of the other. So going back to this diagram, okay, so how many distinct relationships do you think exist in this family? 5? No. 10? 20? No. Higher. 30? No. 50? No. If you look at it, there are at least 65 distinct relationships in this family. I will leave it up to you to try to identify those 65 distinct relationships. So the next question that is posed to us is, what is a family and what are the different family structures? In 1949, a psychosocial scientist by the name of George Murdoch defined the family as a social group characterized by common residence, economic cooperation, and reproduction. It includes adults of both sexes, at least 2 of whom maintain a socially approved sexual relationship, and 1 or more children, owned or adopted, of the sexually cohabiting adults. As I've mentioned, this is a 1949 definition of what a family is. And of course, now that it's 2025, we would expect that this definition would have significantly changed. But one current perspective is that the family is a fundamental social group in society, typically consisting of 1 or 2 parents and their children. Another one is that 2 or more people who share goals, values, have long-term commitments to one another, and reside usually in the same dwelling. But of course, each one of us will have a different perspective of what constitutes a family. So what are the different family structures? Where the 2 basic classifications would be the traditional and the modern structures. Let's look at the more traditional structures of the family. First and foremost, we have the nuclear family. Then the nuclear family is, of course, usually just the parents and then a few children. The single parent family, only one parent is around. the childless family, you have a couple with no kids. Extended families, you have a nuclear family, and then they have extended individuals such as grandparents or aunts and uncles. Then you have a step family in which one marries into a pre-existing family. A step family is also called a blended family, particularly if each partner has children of their own. So if they come together, then they should be blended. And then finally, what we commonly see now in the Philippines is the grandparent family, in which the grandparents are the ones raising the children. Okay, and one reason for this in the Philippines is that because the parents are all overseas Filipino workers, and therefore the children are usually left under the care of their grandparents. So those are the more traditional structures of families that we see. So what else can be added from a more modern perspective? Number one, we have same-sex parents. So in which you have two fathers or two mothers, okay? And then we have a parentless family. So if you have a childless family, you can also have a parentless family in which the children are already orphaned or the children are all grown up and their parents have already passed on due to old age or disease. Then you have a mixed race family. You can have uh, individuals from various cultures coming together. So it doesn't necessarily have to be all Filipinos. You can have a Filipino marrying a Caucasian or a Filipino marrying a Malaysian. Okay. So these are what we would call mixed race families. Okay. Then there's the unwed family. So the parents then do not necessarily have to be legally wed or legally married to constitute a family. So you can have unwed families. You can have adoptive families. So this is a variant of the childless family, but they become an adoptive family by adopting a child. Okay. And then there's what we would call, although this is really a very broad concept, the non-related family, because we often say that we are family with the people that we're with, who share our goals, our visions, and who we care for. So this could include your classmates, this could include your coworkers. Okay, so you may not be related by blood, but you can still consider each other as members of the same family. Okay. So other guide questions. So now we're focusing on the FLC or family life cycle. So what is the family life cycle? What is the importance of understanding it? What are its stages? What are the tasks or goals of each stage? And for our family in question, at what FLC stage is this family? So when you talk about family life cycle, it's the emotional and intellectual stages you pass through from childhood to your retirement years as a member of a family. And so this is what we would call a family life cycle. In each stage, you face challenges in your family life that allow you to build or gain new skills. Gaining new skills helps you work through the changes that nearly every family goes through. Not everyone passes through these stages smoothly. Situations such as severe illness, financial problems, or the death of a loved one can have an effect on how well you pass through the stages. Fortunately, if you miss these skills in one stage, you can still learn them in later stages. So let's look at the stages of the family life cycle in the next slide. So we start off first with the unattached young adult. So the stages of the family life cycle would include first independence, that's the unattached young adult, coupling or marriage, the developing into a newly married couple. So you have two young adults that come together and become a newly married couple. Then they have children. So family with young children, so they develop parenting skills, babies through adolescence. So family with adolescents will be the next one. And then the adolescents, of course, grow up, they become adult children. So they are launched into the world. And then finally, the parents grow old. So that's why we call it family in later years. They may retire from work or become senior citizens. So why is it important to understand the family life cycle? Mastering the skills and milestones of each stage allows you to successfully move from one stage of development to the next. If you don't master the skills, you may still move on to the next phase of the life cycle, but you are more likely to have difficulty with relationships and future transitions. family life cycle theory suggests that successful transitioning may also help to prevent disease and emotional or stress related disorders. Whether you are a parent or family, a parent or child, brother or sister, bonded by blood or love, your experiences through the family life cycle will affect who you are and who you become. The more you understand about the challenges of each stage of the life cycle, the more likely you are to successfully move on. So, with our family in question, Miguel and Trisa's family are in these overlapping stages. So, there are families with young children. So, in this case, it's Judith and Sam, and families with an adolescent, Bernie. So, these are their tasks, and these are the second order changes that are required to proceed developmentally. So, these are what they need to be able to accomplish for them to be able to move on. So, what we are seeing right now in this family is that because of the conflict that exists, so the family may be stuck in a particular stage and may be unable to move on successfully. So, what was the reason for Miguel's consultation? It was because of his recent uncontrollable anger towards his eldest son, Bernie, coupled with guilt feelings for hitting the boy during an argument about cleaning his room. So one of your tasks would be to contrast and compare the FLC with HLC. Having gone through the human lifespan, you should be able at this point to be able to uh, compare it with the family life cycle. So let's proceed with identifying, describing the various parenting styles. But first and foremost, we need to define parenting first. So parenting is the process of raising a child and supporting their physical, cognitive, social, emotional, and educational development from infancy through adulthood. It involves providing care, protection, and guidance to ensure a child's healthy development and prepare them for a life as a productive adult. There are no quick fix approaches, okay, and good parenting takes time and effort. So there, but what we're saying is there are no band-aid solutions to any conflict or disturbance that arises within the family. And we must also emphasize that quality of relationships is more important than quantity. So let's proceed with additional understanding about parenting. Okay. So Diana Bloomberg Bomrin was a clinical and developmental psychologist who was known for her research on parenting styles. So she defined three parenting styles. So the first one is authoritarian parenting style, which is characterized by high demandingness with low responsiveness. The authoritarian parent is rigid, harsh, and demanding. Abusive parents usually fall in this category, although Bomrin is careful to emphasize that not all authoritarian parents are abusive. The second style is called permissive. This parenting style is characterized by low demandingness with high responsiveness. The permissive parent is overly responsive to the child's demands, seldom enforcing consistent rules. The spoiled child often has permissive parents. The last style is authoritative. This parenting style is characterized by demandingness with huge responsiveness. The authoritative parent is firm but not rigid, willing to make an exception when the situation warrants. The authoritative parent is responsive to the child's needs but not indulgent. Bomrin makes it clear that she favors the authoritative styles. Later on, a couple of psychosocial scientists by the name of Macoby and Martin expanded Bomrin's three parenting styles to four. So essentially, they split up permissive to indulgent and neglectful. So eventually, it became authoritative, authoritarian, indulgent, and neglectful. Okay. So classification of parenting styles. So the first one is authoritative, which is warm, supportive. There's accountability stress. Okay. So the parent is demanding and controlling, but accepting and responsive. The opposite is authoritarian, also demanding and controlling, but rejecting and unresponsive. So the authoritarian parent is restrictive and punitive. Next is indulgent. The parent is undemanding and uncontrolling, but accepting and responsive. So the indulgent parent is highly involved, but it's the child who sets the rules. So there are no controls. And then finally, you have the neglectful parent who's undemanding and uncontrolling, but rejecting and unresponsive. They're usually uninvolved in the child's life and provides no controls, no norms. So which do you think is the best parenting style and why? However, it will depend really on the situation. Okay. Although Bong favors the authoritative style, we need to understand that again, it depends on the situation. It would also depend on the child's age and capabilities, his attitudes or personality, and also the parent's age and capabilities, for example, you can become a parent at 15 years old or 18 years old, and you may not be prepared emotionally to becoming a parent, as opposed to someone who becomes a parent at the age of 30 or 35, they would more likely be more emotionally prepared and even be financially prepared to handle the demands or rigors of parenting. So those are some of the things that we need to consider when we talk about which parenting style is best. So let's provide additional family background. So for the past 6 months, according to Miguel, the eldest son, Bernie, has become increasingly stubborn and selfish. The boy would go home late from school, failing to look after his two younger siblings at home. The family has no maid, and the couple expect Bernie to be more responsible. This resulted to frequent arguments between father and son, which has at one time ended with Miguel slapping Bernie. Because Bernie was in his room, he had his headphones on, he was playing a game, and his father was telling him to clean his room. But Bernie, of course, didn't hear his father because of the headphones, which Miguel then grabbed. And then, of course, this angered Bernie, and they got into an argument, which resulted to Miguel physically hitting his son, which he felt really very bad about and felt really very guilty with. So, what are the developmental issues that are noted between these two individuals, between father and son? We need to remember that Bernie is a teenager, and therefore his developmental task would focus on independence and identity formation. While Miguel, who is in adulthood, his developmental tasks are starting and supporting a family and having and maintaining a successful career. Let's look at additional background, particularly between the wife Trisha and the sister Judy. So Bernie remains close to his mom Trisha, but has become increasingly aloof towards his dad Miguel. Bernie does not get along well with his sister Judith, who always teases and irritates him. So let's look at some guide questions. For these questions, I will leave it up to you. So this will be your tasks to analyze these questions. But I'll just provide a couple of reminders. So remember that Trisha will be in a very difficult situation because she will be caught between her husband and her son, whom she both loves. Okay. Another reminder is that Judith has an interesting dynamic in this family. So you need to look deeper into her relationship with her father and brother. So what advice would you give Miguel? What strategies can be employed to resolve the issues between father and son? So at this point, you already have enough information about this case and also about human lifespan to be able to come up with some ideas as to how we can provide help to this family. So not just to Miguel, not just to Bernie, but for the entire family. So leave this up to you to discuss among yourselves, so you can do this individually to come up with responses or answers to these guide questions. Let's look at additional information so that we can have a better understanding of what Bernie is going through. So this does not necessarily excuse or explain his behavior, but at least it gives us a better idea of what he may be going through. So actually, Bernie got delayed in school for 1 year because he had the long hospitalization and recovery from dengue, hemorrhagic fever. Previously, he was an excellent student, but now he's only a good student, quote unquote, good student. He was also apparently bullied um, in school because he came home one day with a black eye and he refused to talk about it. Okay. So now you have a better understanding that Bernie is not with his original group of classmates. So his original group of classmates and probably even friends have already moved on to the next year while he had to stay behind because of illness. And this has affected his academic performance and most likely his social relationships as well. So what advice would you give Miguel and Trisha, and how would you help Bernie? Can you relate this issue with this HLC stage? Again, I will leave this up to you to discuss. Okay, but again, remember that Miguel and Trisha are adults going into middle age. That Bernie is a teenager, and relate the situation, all this that's happening to their developmental tasks. Okay, in terms of what they need to be able to accomplish as far as their current situation is concerned. And in all of these issues, what is the role of Sam from the perspective of his human life cycle or human lifespan stage? So Sam is 6 years old. What is his stage of cognitive development according to Piaget? So look into this because this is going to be very important, because try to remember what kind of mental processes he is using at this stage and whether he has enough cognitive function to understand what is going on in the family. Okay. So I want you to, so your final task is to summarize the main issues and approaches to this family. You need to do it individually for Miguel, Trisha, Bernie, Judith, and Sam, but you also need to do it collectively as a family. Okay. So this family life cycle case will underscore the important roles of individual therapy and family therapy. And with that, I'd like to end this case discussion. And I hope that this has given you a good opportunity to better understand what goes on within the family. From a psychiatric perspective, we may see one individual, but we often need to look at the other members of the family because the relationships that they have can give very important clues as to what's happening on the individual and also to the family. Okay.